Margie Amodio. I am the coordinator at the Kelly Adirondack Center, and we're thrilled to be working with you today.
All right, good morning and welcome to the Kelly Adirondack Center. We are thrilled that you decided to join us today. And the Kelly Adirondack Center is based on the home of Paul Schaefer. Paul Schaefer was an Adirondack conservationist. He was born in 1908. That gives you some kind of a clue as to what his time frame was. He passed away in 1996. And during that time, New York State was really trying to decide what the Adirondack Park was going to be, what it was going to look like. So this was a very formative time, and Paul Schaefer played a huge role in what that was going to be. So what the Adirondack Park looks like today is very, very much a result of the work of Paul Schaefer. And we're very, very fortunate in Niskayuna to have his home and to be able to preserve his home and his legacy, really, for everyone. And so the original home, Paul Schaefer actually built the home himself. When he was in high school, he left high school at 13 and took an apprenticeship with a builder. So at just 28, he built this home himself. He and his brother Carl, he had taken an apprenticeship with a builder, and his brother Carl had taken an apprenticeship with a mason. So between the two of them, they built this house themselves in 1935. And then in 1949, they added the Adirondack room on the end, and that was built there specifically for his conservation activities. He would meet with legislators and discuss legislation that they were proposing and the results of that, and we'll take a look at the map in a little while. And he would also have programs there to educate people so that when they voted, they knew exactly what they were voting for in regard to environmental proposals. So very, very important work, and we're thrilled to be able to preserve that. So Paul Schaefer was a builder by trade, and when I first started working here, I was told that there were 50 Paul Schaefer homes, and I said that to someone who knew him very well, and he said, "Oh, no, it's more like 200. And then I read in an article that Paul Schaefer had written that it was more like 500. And we think that that might be a little bit of a stretch, that maybe he did work on 500 projects over the course of his career. But we think it's probably more around 80 homes in Niskayuna, Rotterdam, and Schenectady that he built. And there are certain things in Paul Schaefer homes that people think of as very indicative of a Paul Schaefer home. One of the big things is there are side lights next to the door. And he tried to stay with the style of the Dutch settlers. He really, really appreciated all the woodwork that they did and all the natural elements that they included. And so many of his homes have those. Many of his homes will have those small windows like those up there across the front. And as you drive around the neighborhood here in Niskayuna, you'll see lots of those for sure. And the 12 windows are also another sign of a Paul Schaefer home, as well as the stone. Stone and brick were really the two elements that he used the most. We even found a Tudor-style home that he created. He would design the homes, and then he would bring the plans to a builder, to an architect, and they would approve the plans, and then he was able to build them. So he was not an architect. As I said, he left school at 13. So he did a lot of research, and really he knew what he was doing. He had done this hundreds of times on other people's homes as he was an apprentice, but he really had no formal training as far as an architect. Another thing, all of the homes, except for one, have slate roofs, the original homes. And because the house plans were given to the homeowners, we don't have a lot of the house plans. We only have 2 or 3 house plans in Paul Schaefer's house. We have been working with the town of Niskayuna and some Paul Schaefer homeowners to try to pull together a list of Paul Schaefer homes. And as you're driving through the neighborhood, certainly even somebody with an average skill can pick out which ones were probably Paul Schaefer homes. So we're interested definitely in pulling together a more accurate list of Paul Schaefer homes. So this little addition here on the end was actually an office for Paul Schaefer. He worked with a woman named Lydia Sorrell, who was his right-hand woman when it came to bookkeeping and billing and things like that, and really kept everything organized. And this is where they worked out of. And we don't use it currently as we're using it for storage, but it's such a beautiful doorway and a beautiful addition to the home. All right, so when Paul Schaefer passed away in 1996, his family sold the home to a group called the Association for the Protection of the Adirondacks. And Paul Schaefer had been the vice president of the association for nearly 50 years when he passed away. So it was a very, very important group to him. He did belong to many different committees and associations. I counted once there were at least 20 different environmental organizations that he belonged to and committees. So the Association for the Protection of the Adirondacks, they purchased the home in 1996, and then they added this addition on in 2004. And it contains an exhibit space in the middle that you'll see here, and then the lower level of this building was built to be the Adirondack Research Library, which it still is, and then there are offices for association executives upstairs. And it's such a beautiful space, and we certainly feel very, very fortunate to come to work here every day. All right, welcome to the entryway of the Paul Schaefer home. This part, as I said, was built in 1935 by Paul Schaefer. He used a lot of materials that he had gathered from other places, and the beams in the home were taken from an old Dutch barn that was being taken down in Albany at the time. If you think about 1935, it was very much that, well, in general, but especially in the Capital District, things were changing from an agrarian culture to an industrial culture. They were taking down these barns, and Paul Schaefer and his brother Vincent especially, were very interested in preserving all this history. So these beams were taken from a Dutch barn that was being taken down in Albany. It was built in 1701, and the beams are from logs that are dated to be 300 years old at the time the tree was taken down. So extremely old. He would drive to Albany in his own personal truck and load these beams on the back of them. He would pay people from the side of the road to sit on the back of his truck and hold on to these beams as he drove them up here to Niskayuna. And so the house is built on 2 acres of land. We're very fortunate to have the rice sanctuary behind us, which is 111 acres. And that's all filled with trails, which are open to the public all the time. It's owned by the Hudson Mohawk Bird Club. It was given to them by the Rice family. Mrs. Rice donated it in her husband's name to the Hudson Mohawk Bird Club. And Paul Schaefer had done work for the Rice down at the Pierce homestead, which is one of the oldest homesteads in the town of Niskayuna. And in return for that, he was given the 2 acres of land that the house is on. So the house and the 2 acres of land are now belong to Union College. In 2011, the association could not afford to keep the facility anymore, and Union College purchased it from the Association for the Protection of the Adirondacks at that time. So Union College owns the facility and the 2 acres that it's on, but we do have that fantastic backyard of 111 acres, which is pretty outstanding. The fireplace here, the mantle, was actually from the Pierce homestead. They were going to throw it out, and Paul Schaefer said, "Oh no, please don't throw it out, may I have it?" And so he was given that. So that's a fantastic connection to the Rice family and to the land and to that story. In the fireplace there too is the Adirondack cooking crane. Paul Schaefer had a patent on that. And the way he tells the story is he was cooking a steak on it, and he had a pot of coffee on the side, and he went to flip the steak, and the pot of coffee spilled all over the steak, and he had to throw the steak to the dog. And I can't imagine as a child of the Depression that he would ever throw a steak to a dog, but that's the way he tells the story, so that's the way I tell the story. And a lot of the other Paul Schaefer homes also have the cooking cranes in them. He sold them separately, but he also put a lot of them in the homes. And I mentioned that the way he tells the story, he actually wrote 2 books. He wrote Defending the Wilderness and Adirondack Cabin Country. So if anybody is interested in more about Paul Schaefer, those are both fabulous resources, straight from his words. So, and those are available at most libraries or definitely online. All right, welcome to the living room at the Paul Schaefer home. There are a lot of fantastic stories that go along with this home. As you can imagine, I'm sure all of your families have fantastic stories, but this home really just has outstanding stories. It took a year and a half to build the home, and during that time, Paul Schaefer and his wife Carolyn actually lived out back in tents. And I asked his nephew, does that mean winter too? Is that like possible? Oh, absolutely winter too. These people were diehard outdoors people and really, really enjoyed it. So for a year and a half they lived out back, and we did the math, and for part of that time Carolyn was actually pregnant. So I cannot imagine sleeping in a sleeping bag in a tent while you were pregnant, but she was brave enough to do that. And she came in to see the house the first time, and it was that entryway that we just saw in the living room, and there were 2 bedrooms and a bathroom upstairs. And she said, where's the kitchen? He had not put a kitchen in the original home. They had been cooking over a fire for a year and a half. So he thought, fireplace was going to be a huge step up. And she's like, no, it's 1935, it's not 1635. So the first addition was this kitchen over here. And I'll stand in it just for size. You can imagine it was really just enough room for one person to turn around. Once you had a sink and a stove and a refrigerator here, especially the size of them at the time, barely enough room to turn around. But if you think 1935, it really was just her in the kitchen probably. So that was that they were thinking of. And so when they did have 4 children, and we get a lot of great stories from them too. And it's great. They're a fabulous resource because they can confirm stories that you hear, because there are a lot of stories in the ether, again, just with every family, with every home. There are a lot of stories out there, but it's great to get stories directly from people. And so once they had the 4 children, they started using this as a dining room, and he built a kitchen out here. But he didn't go very far with it. It had a dirt floor, and the stories are told that the snakes would come in, when it was warmer inside than it was outside. The snakes would come in under the door, and while Carolyn was doing dishes, and I asked their daughter, is that a true story? Absolutely, that was a true story. The snakes would come in while she was washing dishes. So yeah, very, very rustic, but a beautiful home nonetheless. And the Union students, when they come in, they absolutely fall in love with the place. Just like so many of them have said that this would be their dream home, that they would absolutely love it. And it's that kind of a place that you walk into and immediately you feel like you're at home. It's really quite an extraordinary space. Welcome to the Adirondack Research Library. The collection was actually, collection of books was started by Paul Schaefer. When he was a young man, he started collecting books, and he thought on the Adirondacks, he thought by the time he was finished he might have 80 books. All the books on the Adirondacks would be 80 books. And when he passed away, we think it was closer to 1,000 books that he had in his own personal collection. And after that, the Association for the Protection of the Adirondacks added probably another 1,000 books, and Union College has added another 1,000 books to that collection since then. And beyond the collection of books, we've got people's collections, personal collections, and organizations' collections. We've got about 80 of those. Everything from very small boxes to Paul Schaefer's collection is 88 bankers' boxes. which also gives you an idea of his commitment to the Adirondacks. All of that is material on the Adirondacks that he collected over the course of his lifetime, and all of that was sorted through by archivists to make sure that it had real archival value. There were a lot of printed materials that he put out that we had whole boxes of the same thing, and we have a few of those still in the collection, but you obviously don't need a whole banker's box full of them. So everything in those 88 boxes is real archival and real valuable material. So we're very, very lucky to have that. Another one of our big collections is John Apperson's collection. He was very active on Lake George, specifically in preserving Dome Island and the islands of Lake George, but also involved in controlling the lake levels on Lake George. And John Apperson had been a mentor to Paul Schaefer, and Paul Schaefer was a mentor equally to people like Dave Gibson and Dave Plumley and Ken Rimini, who are very much involved in environmental activism today and protecting the Adirondacks. So there's a real continuity and a real legacy here, and we just feel so profoundly grateful to be a part of that and the stewardship of this space. All right, welcome to Paul Schaefer's Adirondack Room. He did add this on in 1949, specifically for his conservation activities. They would have meetings in here of the association. They would have programs in here to educate people on the issues of the day. And he would also meet with legislators in here. And a great tool for that was this map that we have. And it was built by Paul Schaefer and his friends in Schenectady, 80K, between the years of 1945 and 1954. It took them 9 years. It was 50 volunteers. They estimate 13,000 hours. And you might think that sounds like a very long time by today's standards. How could it possibly take so long? But you think about the technology that they were using at the time. It's really extraordinary. Each of the volunteers took home 11 by 17 topographical maps, and sometimes you can see a little bit where the edges are on each section. They took home the topographical maps and tracing paper and cardboard, and they traced out each of the elevations, built it up with spackle, and then they brought all of the pieces here together in this room, and I had a company come in and make a form out of that, and from the form, this map was made. And Harold Hochschild at the time was up in the Adirondack Experience. It was the Adirondack Museum at Blue Mountain Lake at the time. And he saw this and he said, I've got to have one. So they made a sister map to it. They made another map from that form, and it's still up there. They have theirs laid out horizontally, and it's got lights in it, so you can press Long Lake, and Long Lake will light up and things like that. But this is still a fabulous tool. One of the things that Union College uses this space for right now is the Adirondack and American Environmental History course, and Professor Morris teaches that, and he uses this map all the time. If you want to make a point to the students of how difficult it would have been in 1900 to get from Glens Falls up to Montreal, really to see it on the map with all the elevation changes and with all the water in between, it really makes an impression on you. Also, you can see how much water there is, how many rivers and lakes, and how you can imagine how people would have used that as a means of transportation, but also as it would have been barriers. From an environmental point of view, it also makes a great point of how interconnected everything is, because we only get to know our own little area, but we forget that it has ramifications all over. And people who come in to visit the Kelly Adirondack Center will often go to this map, and they'll love it, and they'll go up and they'll point with their own finger, like, and they'll say, "Oh, this is where our spot is." We don't like them to touch the map, but we love that they love the map. So there it is. But I like to think that, most people, and I've gathered this from probably the thousands of people that have come through since I've been here in 9 years, that most people know exactly what will fit under their finger when they do that. And I am as guilty of that as anyone else. And Paul Schaefer was too, so that's exactly why he created this map. He was down in New York City talking to George Marshall. Many of the people will recognize George Marshall and Bob Marshall. They were the ones who created the Adirondack 46ers list. And so he was talking to George Marshall, and George Marshall asked him about the Moose River Plains area. And that's right over here. And Paul Schaefer's camp was on way over here, and this is the Moose River Plains. And George Marshall asked him about that area, and he said, I don't know. As much as I've spent all my years studying the Adirondacks, Paul Schaefer had gotten his first Adirondack book when he was just about 13 from a bookstore in Albany. And as much as an Adirondack enthusiast as he was, there were a lot of areas that he really didn't know anything about. And so on the way back up in the train, he thought, what we need? We need a giant map that really shows the entire Adirondack Park. This would be a really, really important tool to have. So when he got back, he talked to the members of Schenectady ADK about doing this. And luckily, there was a Colonel William Hanna who had made maps like this, relief maps, in the South Pacific during World War II. So he said, I can teach you how to do this. And he did, with all the volunteers, and they took aerial photography to get the tree lines right, and really made every effort to get it as accurate as possible. There is a little bit of an exaggeration in the elevation, because otherwise you wouldn't be able to see the mountains for all intents and purposes. So yeah, it's a fantastic tool, and we use it all the time. I talk to the students, and I tell them to think about their phones, that you can either zoom in and get detail or zoom out and get context, but you can't get both. And that's an important part of this tool, is that you can really get both. You can get the detail, but you can also look at it in the bigger picture. And as far as environmentally, that's such an important thing to be able to do, and not just focus on your one topic, but to think about how its ramifications are going to affect so many other places. So our hours are Monday through Thursday from 10 to 4, and we do have events here, so I would check our website, which is union.edu/Adirondack, to make sure that it's not an excluded day, or you could also call me. We're at 518-388-7000, and one of the reasons why we might be closed is we have meetings here, we have classes, as I mentioned, in the Adirondack room. We offer the space free to community organizations. We have concerts outside and inside. So we do have quite a bit going on here. Union College uses the space very, very well. And a lot of union groups, organizations, clubs will use the space for their events. It is such a beautiful space, indoors and out. And again, we just feel so fortunate to have it.